Hello, this SOLIDWORKS demo will cover sweeps. A sweep is made from a profile, which is a shape that follows a path, like a track, like a train on a track, and basically allows for an extrude command to follow complex curvature. Now there are some best practices for sweeps. In this first example, you'll notice that the path is perpendicular, so this pink path is perpendicular to this profile shape. So they have a 90-degree relationship. This ensures that the profile shape that's intended is maintained along this path. If I show an example of a path that is not perpendicular to the shape, you can see that the resulting swept body has an unintended profile which is skewed, like a skewed version of the profile. So in this case, it's a circle that then ends up getting swept as an oval. So that's not intended. So make sure that your path is perpendicular to your profile for best practice. Another way that a sweep may fail is if the profile and the path do not intersect on the same plane. So here you can see this gap from the plane to the starting points, and it simply gives an error. All I need to do to fix that error is edit my sketch and just make sure that the path intersects the plane that the profile is on. Here you can see I went a little bit too far, but the sweep should still work. If it does go in both directions, you end up having an option to either sweep left, right, or in both ways. But generally best practice is to end the path on that plane. Now it's worth mentioning that it is the plane intersection that is important, not necessarily the feature intersection is important as well, but the path will still work. So for example, if I just take my profile here and just drag it up into the left, you can see that the sweep is still working even though they're not touching each other. It's because the planes are touching, which is what matters, but the sweep is still successful. However, this is still not ideal because typically with your path, you kind of set the curvature, the track you want it to follow, and here you can see the resulting swept body has actually a much larger radius because of this offset. This can lead to errors if, in this instance, we went wider than the path. If we go smaller than the path, you can have unintended consequences. So this bend here gets tight, and the tighter this bend gets, the greater chance that the sweep will end up failing. So if I drag this further down, at some point I will get an error. And it's basically saying that the sweep cannot pass through this path because it is a too tight of a corner and it hits itself, it intersects with itself. So let me demonstrate that a little bit more clearly. I'm going to center this profile again. And now let's look specifically at this radius here. So this circle is 1 inch in diameter, and we have it intersecting in the middle. So half of the body, or half of the shape, is 1/2 inch. If I change this radius to be just bigger than 1/2 inch, let's say 0.6, you can see that it can still turn this corner. It's just getting tighter. Now what happens if I take this and make it exactly 1/2 inch? What does it look like? You can see it still succeeds, but it comes to a tight pinch here. And in fact, this is the smallest that the sweep can follow without failing. And you can see if we take a front view, it actually gives us a 90-degree angle in there. If I take this radius and even just change it to 0.49, the sweep will now fail because it's hitting itself. So stated as a rule, assuming a centered intersection, the path arc radius must be larger than half the profile height, equal to or larger than. So in this case, if I make it equal to here, I edit this to be 0.5. This radius is this radius value of 1/2 inch is equal to the 1/2 inch height from edge to center of path of this profile. So just keep that in mind. The main takeaway is if your sweep is failing, look at the corners or the curves and make sure you may need to make them larger. And you can try that as a troubleshooting. The last thing I want to mention is complex sweeps. So sweeps can follow along edges, not just sketches as we have seen up until this point. Then they can also travel in multiple directions, and this is one of the easier ways to set this up, is to kind of create this sort of dummy body. You can see I have some fillets on here to change the direction. So I'm going to load another sweep command, select the profile, and now when it comes to selecting the path, if I just click on an edge, it sort of gets hung up. It only selects one edge at a time. In order to select multiple edges, you need a feature called Selection Manager. You can load that by right-clicking anywhere in your window, third from the top, Selection Manager. The default is these 3 cursor icons. That's exactly what you want. And you can simply select multiple edges for the sweep to follow. Now you want to make sure that they're all connected. So here I've purposely left a gap. I know it's a gap because I see these 2 icons. I want to make sure that I select this edge, otherwise I'll get an error. And now it's a complete path. When I have my path selected, I can click the green checkbox, and now we can see that the sweep can travel along this track. If you are using this technique, it's important to note to change the options to uncheck merge result so that you don't accidentally merge your sweep with the construction body. So there you have it, a complex sweep command. We're going to use the sweep command to build a handle. So we're going to go File, New, and select the part template. We'll start by creating some master sketches here to help set up our handle. So we'll start with a sketch on the right plane. So I'm selecting the right plane from the tree, Alt plus S to create a sketch. I'm going to start by sketching a circle above the origin. So I'm letting the blue line guide me. I'm going to sketch a horizontal line through the circle. So I'm going to hover over the circle's edge and create a horizontal line from one edge to the other, L for line. Now I'm going to create a vertical line from the origin, so clicking on the origin and then at the top part of the circle. And this will start our master sketch. And I want to make some adjustments to the circle. I want the handle to have a slightly different curvature on the front, so I'm going to hit T for trim and click on the top 2 arcs, or the top arc of the circle. So hopefully we are left with a half circle with 2 lines that create sort of a T letter, a lowercase t. I'm going to select both lines and set them to be for construction, A for arc, and complete the half circle with a shorter arc. Adding some dimensions here, the horizontal line is dimensioned to 1 inch wide. From the origin to that horizontal line is 1.75 inches. And then I'm going to select my top arc and the end point of the vertical line and set them to be coincident. And finally a dimension, D for dimension on the keypad, from the horizontal line to the top end point of the vertical line, and I'm going to set that to 1/4 inch, 0.25 inches. And that is our profile. I'm going to exit that sketch. A new front plane sketch. So selecting the front plane, Alt-S and Alt-N to change the view normal to it. I'm going to create a horizontal line from the origin, and this will set the width of half the width of our handle. So I'm going to set this to be 4 inches wide, so our handle overall will be about 8 inches wide. And I'm going to set this to be for construction. I'm now going to create another horizontal line that bisects the horizontal line from the sketch we just created. And if I hover it properly, it'll snap horizontal and set these 2 horizontal lines to be for construction. I'm now going to create an arc, A for arc, and select select a point on the right plane where it intersects that horizontal line we just created, and then the end point of the horizontal line that is attached to the origin. And now I want to make sure that it looks like it automatically added this, but if it didn't, I want to select my arc and the floating horizontal line and set them to be tangent to each other. And now I have a nice tangent arc. Now it is worth mentioning that you could, instead of an arc, you could use a spline. So in which case you want to locate the spline icon in your sketch tab in your command manager. And I'm going to click on the horizontal line, basically the 2 endpoints that the arc was created on. And you can see that the spline can start to move, but once you select both endpoints, I'm just going to hit escape. It looks like a straight line to begin with. But then we're going to select our spline and our floating horizontal line and tell them to be tangent to each other. And that will bring up a sort of blue arrow that allows you to set your spline. So you could have a slightly more custom curvature for your handle. I'm just going to drag the blue line a little bit over. You don't want to do anything too crazy, otherwise the sweep will fail because it'll be too tight of a turn to make. So now you should have basically your two sketches, your profile and your path, but these will also be sort of the master sketches, which is a good habit to get into for building a model, as we learned in the first project. It's worth mentioning we plan to model this handle as a half and mirror it at the end. It's just a good CAD habit to get into to build your symmetric objects in half whenever possible. It's less steps and it will ensure that your object is symmetrical at the end. So to start our handle, we want to copy our master sketches. So I'm going to create a new right plane sketch and select the first sketch we made and then either C on the keyboard or convert entities in the feature tree, and then exit that sketch. I'm going to repeat that on the front plane, new front plane sketch, select the second sketch we made, and convert entities, or C on the keyboard. Now we're going to load the swept boss base command. It located in the feature tab of the command manager. I could select from the window, but I might accidentally select my master sketches, so I want to make the tree appear by clicking the black arrow next to the product name, just to the right of the property manager. So the first thing it's prompting us for is the profile, and I'm going to select sketch 3, which should be the copied profile. And then for the path, I'm going to select sketch 4 and check that box. Now I did skip a step here, but I can use this to show you why we do it. The top plane will represent kind of the mating face that the handle will eventually end up on our appliance. Here you can see there's a gap that the sweep has left because it does not fully break this plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and edit my copied path sketch, and I'm just going to click that endpoint and just drag it so it's below the top plane. And now when we cut this with the next step here, the handle will end cleanly on the top plane. So like I mentioned, we will now cut the handle using a command called cut with surface under the surfaces tab in your command manager. And what it's asking for is a surface with which to cut. And since we want it to end on the top plane, we're going to use the top plane. You want to make sure that the arrow is pointing down and click the green checkbox. And now we have a handle that will mount nice and flat without any gaps to our appliance. We want to add some realistic details now. So the first thing we're going to add is a part line. I'm going to create a new front plane sketch. And once again, from the master sketch, I'm going to copy the path line. So in this case, it's a spline for me. And then exit that sketch. There's two ways to do this. The first way is using the cut command, extruded cut command. It's a command we're already familiar with, and we can sort of dig a little bit deeper into some of the features here. So for direction, we're going to say through all both. This sends the line in both directions. But we also want to use a thin feature. So there's a box down here that says thin feature. You want to check that. And because this is not a closed shape, what it does is it gives thickness to the line. Some of the settings I like here, instead of one direction, I like to use midplane. So it centers that thickness on there. But because this is a part line, we also just want to set the thickness to be something incredibly thin, like 0.001. We don't actually want to see a gap in our handle. We just kind of want to split it. So once you have those settings set up, you can click the green checkbox. A pop-up will appear because the result will be two bodies, and you just want to click OK to keep all the bodies. You don't want to get rid of anything. Now the next step here is to fillet our part line. Oh, sorry, before I get ahead, I mentioned there's two ways to do this. So to just quickly show the other way, I'm going to create another front plane sketch and again convert entities on the master path. Exit that sketch. And you can locate a command, if you're curious about this, in the feature tab called split. For me, it's sort of top center. What this does is, if you have your sketch selected, it's using the sketch as a trim tool. In the resulting bodies in the property manager, you can click on a box there and select either the top or the bottom of the handle and click the checkbox. And this will have the same result where you have split the body into two pieces. It is a little less feature intensive, but it's a new feature. I just wanted to mention that that exists if you want to use that instead. The next thing we need to do is add fillets to our part line to make it look real. So I'm going to actually select one of these bodies, and I can either right click on it and just click the eyeball to hide it. This will make adding our fillet a little bit easier. So I'm going to click on the fillet command in the feature tab in the command manager. Using the default settings, I'm just going to click on these two internal edges that the cut just created. And I'm going to set this to be 0.02 inches in diameter. That's roughly half a millimeter, sort of a realistic part line fillet. Now I can show the missing body by going into the tree, finding the solid bodies folder at the top, clicking on the white body, and clicking the eyeball. And now same thing, load the fillet command. This should be easier to select now that one edge has already been filleted. And it should remember the value that we just added. So now we have sort of a visual part line just for rendering. It'll make our product look a little bit more realistic and believable. Now we want to add some grips. We're going to create a new front plane sketch. So select the front plane, Alt-S, Alt-N, so we look normal to it. I'm going to create a circle above the origin. So I'm using the blue dotted lines to help align that, or I can simply even create a vertical line for construction above the origin and have the circle centered on the endpoint. Now we want the circle to overlap the back part of the handle just a bit for our grip. It really doesn't matter how big the circle is or how much overlap. This can be to your own taste. And while we're still in the sketch, I'm going to load extruded cut command from the feature tab. For the settings here, I want to select through all both, and the rest can stay as default, and click that checkbox. And now it looks like we have a small scallop centered on our handle. What we want to do now is pattern this so we have a couple scallops. So what I'm going to do is look for a command called linear pattern in the command manager, but you want to actually click on the arrow below linear pattern because we want to find a command called curve driven pattern and select that feature. For the direction, we can expand our tree again by clicking the small black triangle to the right of the property manager and finding the master sketch sweep path, and that will be our direction. For the feature, the next thing we want to select in the property manager is the feature that we want to pattern. So in this case, the extruded cut that we just did. And you should be able to see some like yellow lines that represent where those cuts may be. The default spacing is really tight at 0.1. If you increase that spacing, you will see that the cut expands and moves out. If we check the box now, you may notice that the cut gets deeper the further it gets away from the initial cut. And that's sort of the same principle of what's going on if a sweep is not centered on the path, or a profile is not centered on the path. Because the path is off center of the feature, that's why it's leading to kind of this like uneven cut here. So there's a feature under the curve driven pattern that we want to check called offset curve, and that basically does the math to keep the offset sort of parallel to the path to keep those cuts even. Now finally, we can just add some fillets to our grip detail. So I'm just loading the fillet feature and just clicking on all of these edges, or the faces if that's easier to select, of the cut scallop. Again, the value doesn't matter. I'm just setting mine to 0.1 inches. There you have it. We have our grip. The final thing to do is to mirror our handle. So I'm going to locate the mirror feature in the command manager. The first thing it's asking us for is what you want to mirror about. In this case, we want to mirror about the right plane. And again, if you can't see that, you want to expand your tree to the right of the property manager. And I believe it typically defaults to features to mirror, but in this case, you want to expand the box that says bodies to mirror. Click in that box below bodies to mirror, and then just simply select both handle bodies. For options, you want to select merge solids. I tend to uncheck propagate visual properties, as I found that can be buggy if you're trying to apply colors to your file in SolidWorks. And then I'm going to click on the checkbox. What the merge bodies does is it'll merge the top part of the handle to the newly created mirrored top part and the back to the back part. However, it will still keep the top and the back of the handle separate. So there you have it, a swept handle. I do want to mention that you can add some details to this at this point if you wanted to make it look more like your chosen aesthetic direction. So one thing you could do, for example, is add sort of a bezel or a bevel where the handle meets the surface. So I can create a new sketch on the top plane. I can select two of these edges here and convert entities and sort of drag them so that the sketch is longer. And then I'm going to use my trim tool to trim these. Now I'm going to load an extrude feature. Now in this case I want to use the thin feature again. We just used it with the cut command, but here we can use it with the extrude command. And set the value to like something like 0.2. You can change the direction the thin feature goes. You want to make sure it goes wider than the handle. And here you can kind of set the height of this bezel. You want to make sure I want to make sure you don't merge results, or in this case. And now it's kind of just like a plate or something that the handle is coming off of. This can be terminated with either fillets or chamfers to get a little bit more sort of design aesthetic. Again, it depends on the look you're going for. But you know, you can add sort of these mounting plates here, and really the best practice would be to do this before the mirror, or you could mirror it again to have it appear on both sides of your feature, or of your handle rather. Other things you can do is you can actually go and modify, you know, some of these commands here. So for example, you know, if I'm thinking about my handle. For my aesthetic, maybe the top, it's going to be a little bit more square. So I can actually go back to my first sweep command, edit the profile sketch, change some of this. So in this case, I'm going to change this to before construction. And I'm actually just going to create some straight lines here to make this a little bit more, give it a bit more of a minimal aesthetic, and it's slightly more squared off. And now here we can see that the handle has this kind of chunky look to it. If you make changes like this, some errors may appear. For example, it's lost the fillet here when we did the edge because we changed what the sketch looked like. So you simply, you know, if you see sort of these red exclamation marks or yellow exclamation marks, you can go in and edit the feature and see what's going on. So here it's missing. I can simply just reselect these back edges to point to the part line again. And then I keep just moving this blue bar down on the tree. You know, maybe the thing missing now is I just need a fillet on this edge, or again, I could put a chamfer on here depending on what your aesthetic is. You know, again, for my aesthetic, it would probably be a pretty tight fillet, like 0.05 inches or something. Now, of course, you can always play with your path, which, you know, if it's a spline, you have a little bit more freedom to kind of push and pull on this. Of course, up until the point where the sweep fails, if that turn gets a little bit too tight, there may be an error. All right, so there you have it. You have a handle and a way to modify it. Thanks for following along.